Am I picking up? Okay. I'm Heidi Waterhouse, and I am a Minneapolis local, and I work for a Silicon Valley company that is actually in Oakland. We're called LaunchDarkly, and we do feature flags as a service. And if that sounds super weird and confusing, come talk to me, and I will give you cute stickers and a postcard.
Nice. Love it. All right. So just quick show of... Whoa. I'm going to get good at this, I swear. Quick show of hands. Which of you, who knows what feature flags are, have maybe used them before, have any idea why you would want such a thing?
Yes.
Ooh, so I would say maybe half the room or a little bit less has some idea why they would care about that. Excellent. Okay, please continue introductions.
I'm Heather Mickman. I work in Optum Tech, so also local, and Optum Tech is local here, but has offices across the country, very distributed workforce, working on really interesting things to help improve healthcare for all of us.
Nice. Okay.
My name's Dave Strebel. I'm a open source technical specialist for Microsoft. So I focus on helping customers be successful with the open source solutions on Azure. One time I did log into a Windows server in my life, and I got a blue screen, and haven't touched it since.
Nice.
Are you still recovering from that experience?
Yeah, I am. They told me it's fixed in Service Pack 8, so.
Which one is that? I kind of feel like that might have been a while ago.
It's coming.
I don't even know.
It's a couple months away.
So, fun fact, I actually also work at Microsoft now, and you're thinking, wait, what? The answer is Microsoft has me using a Mac to talk to people about Linux. And I was like, that actually sounds fine. I can get on board with this Microsoft. So, yeah, so why I wanted, we still have our PagerDuty Summit slide up. Can we get that changed to our headshots of our participants? Because not only should you heckle us and have Nate bring the mic over to you if necessary / desirable, but I think it's also a good idea to, if you want to, tweet about this. Because I feel like this is the sort of thing that we don't necessarily always have a lot of engagement with the local community and the wider world. And it's like, why? We all have the internet. Let's do this. So I think where I would love to start, now that we kind of have an idea of, and we aren't sitting exactly in the order that's on there.
We could rotate.
We don't have to rotate, because I figure we have like color coding, we have hair colors. Dave is not actually in black and white in real life, but
Yeah.
my choices for
picture.
My choices for pictures for you. This is the one you did for one of the cloud summits or something that you spoke at.
Okay.
Because my choices for you were like this, and then kind of a really, I don't know, photo manipulated one that you have on Twitter, and I was like, no.
Oh, that was my real one.
Nice. Oh. All right. So what I wanted to start with is you have vastly different roles at very different companies, and I'm going to actually start with Heather and say, hey, Heather, you recently tweeted about an open source project that's going on at Optum, and people might be like, Optum? Open source? What? So can you talk a little bit about inside a large company that's not officially a tech company, and yet they obviously are, what does open source look like in a company like that?
Well, first, I guess I have to do so Optum is very much on a journey to try and evolve, transform into a software engineering organization in order to help improve healthcare for all of us. I said this, we need to be a technology company, software, and embrace software engineering. And yeah, so recently, and I wasn't involved in it, I am supporting the peeps around me, open sourced the first project out of Optum Tech, and it was called Chaos Slinger, and it's essentially imagine Chaos Monkey security, looking for security flaws within code. So it's very cool. To be honest, I tried to get a couple of the folks here today that were the actual engineers that did the work, but they were unable to make it. But very excited to have that be the first open source project that's been contributed by Optum Tech, and so excited for many more to come.
Oh, it just occurred to me, there's going to be a Chaos Community Day in November. Are you people looped in with Casey Rosenthal and the people running Chaos
No,
Community
but we should
Day?
do that. We should absolutely do that.
We should absolutely do that. I'll definitely send something out about that. Breaking my usual rule, if I don't send things out about everyone's, product roadshow or whatever, not even pivotal ones. But for the Chaos Community Day, it's actually people who are doing chaos engineering in a local area and traveling in remotely, talking about the ways that they're doing it.
Sounds fantastic. Yeah, that'd be a really good fit. Thank you.
So
That'd be great.
failure injection in your systems sounds terrifying, and you probably have someone maybe in the legal department saying well, you definitely should not do that. I'm getting a look from Mark. Do we need heckling about that? Deliberate failure injection, is it a good idea? What could possibly go wrong? Oh my gosh, right? We can talk about that more. So anyway, on this topic of open source, I'm gonna turn now to Dave, my esteemed colleague as of a week and a day at Microsoft. I saw that you recently switched teams at Microsoft, and you're doing even more more open source than before. Can you give us some insight into Microsoft open source ?
Yeah, so I moved roles into a global black belt. They give us a really cool name. I don't actually have a karate outfit I wear, but it's really focusing more on just open source, the open source community, helping customers be successful, letting customers know how they can run open source on Microsoft, because a lot of customers don't know that. They still think, anything we have is some weird Microsoft API and only works with .NET. So a lot of it's around just educating the community is a big part, and really making sure customers are successful on open source on Azure.
So are you the one running the Open at Microsoft Twitter handle?
No, I just tweet it every once in a while.
Nice. Awesome.
I have never seen swag go as fast as when the Tux penguin with the Microsoft flag on its tummy showed up at an open source conference. It was like, pew.
It's like Tux has reformed.
Yes.
Okay, so Heidi, tell us, first of all, what LaunchDarkly is, because I feel like most people probably know Optum and Microsoft, but tell us what LaunchDarkly is, and then tell us about what you're seeing there and in the wider open source space, since you speak at all the conferences.
I do speak at all the conferences. So LaunchDarkly is an organization that is really devoted to getting people to stop rolling their own feature flags, because it turns out that can go really, really sideways. And our CEO did a great blog post on when feature flags fail. And it's about losing millions and millions of dollars on the stock market due to a bad deployment that was...
Is this a Night Capital story?
Yes. Millions of dollars. And so
Didn't they shut down?
Yeah. They pushed a bad deploy, and then they panicked and pushed the bad deploy to 8 systems, all 8 systems, instead of just the one system. And then they traded all of their money away before breakfast or before lunch.
I feel like that's not advisable.
No, but there's a bunch of interesting things where if you don't have someone who's helping you build and understand what you're doing in a best practices kind of way, it's really easy to be like, oh, we're just going to turn this on and off. It's not that big a deal, and yet it is. And so it turns out that we can really help with that. And Bridget's not kidding. I don't think I go to as many conferences as Bridget, but it might be close. I go to more diverse conferences than Bridget, who gets to go to all the DevOps days.
That's not actually true.
That is not physically possible.
It's not physically possible because they're on opposite sides of the planet at the same time.
Yes.
And also, I'm pretty sure you're speaking at more DevOps days this year than I am.
Possibly. I think I'm at 5 now.
I think I'm at 2, maybe,
yeah,
counting the one
I
I'm
win.
running.
So one of the interesting things that I've been seeing in the open source and community space is a lot of people saying, oh, I don't have to be like producing open source and licensing it to be getting a bunch of value from it in my ops organization. Like, I can use Chaos Monkey, I can use these open source tools without getting anywhere into the selling tool chain of trying to get all that licensing right. And I see a lot more people understanding that the tools that you use in ops are not necessarily part of what you have to distribute.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And when an organization does start to decide that they have something they want to distribute, I think maybe I'll ask Dave and then Heather, what does that look like? When you have something that's maybe exists and is not open, or you're just starting to develop and then you want it to be open, what does that process look like if people were trying to do that inside their organizations?
So if you look at Microsoft, it's not an easy thing to do, especially when you sell to all these enterprises. There's legal contracts. One of the biggest hurdles is legal hurdles to open source things. You know, people ask, when will Windows be open source? It'd probably take us 15 years through legal to get something like that. But if you look at something like PowerShell, which we recently open sourced, a lot of that was also learning how to run an open source project, because that's not something we were great at, didn't have a ton of knowledge there. So it was gaining even more insight from the community on how to actually really run an open source project successfully.
Yeah, and that's interesting to me because it makes me wonder, and I'm going to turn to Heather and ask, what's the motivation behind open sourcing something?
Right, so the motivation, I'll say, well, and maybe just to tag on and like highlight, like, yes, legal. And so like getting the legal department to understand and be partners with you to make sure that like choosing the right kind of licensing, we have the right kinds of, you know, protections in place, and we've thought through all those things, very important. And that can be as well, I mean, that's always a really fascinating conversation, I think, at the start as well, right? Because many lawyers aren't, especially within enterprise IT organizations anyways, which is where I come from, most lawyers aren't really familiar with the software world, and so it's a whole kind of education process to walk them through.
AGPL, what?
Yes, yeah. And so what is the motivation? The motivation to me, I mean, I think within an organization is to give back to a community where we start to use more and more kind of open source technologies, you know, within our own organizations, and so just continuing to be a part of the broader community. And then secondly, I mean, honestly, it's to like promote and demonstrate that we have really good software engineers within our organization to the point that we can, you know, build something that makes sense to contribute back to the broader community.
So I actually have a question, which is how does it work for people to work on open source projects while employed for somebody? Like, do they retain some kind of ownership, or is there a legal sign over, or like how does that work? Because the company is open sourcing this and not the individual.
Yes.
I mean, that is going to depend a lot on exactly how your company runs things. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they have a thing called a contributor license agreement. Mm-hmm. I think Dave can probably speak more than I can to exactly how it works at Microsoft, for example. Say I'm putting something up on GitHub and maybe it's relevant to PowerShell. How does that work?
So there is a contributor license there that they kind of go through. There's multiple different ways, and we try to improve it over time. You know, it was probably more Microsoft owns that at first, but we continuously improve on how we do that because we encourage our developers to open source projects.
Yeah. And it also has to do with depending, and I would encourage everyone here who works in tech, even if you don't think that you're a software developer, that doesn't mean that you will never develop anything that you want to, even if it's just some bash script that you wrote that you would really like to, or just some quick little Go utility that you'd like to put there on GitHub. Go read your employment agreement carefully. And when you're choosing new employers, read the employment agreement carefully and see what it says about, do they own absolutely every product of your brain that you type into a computer, and perhaps everything that you ever wrote in the past if you don't, you know, redline it out in your contract. Like, even if you're an FTE and you're not like, you know, coming in as a contractor, you still need to pay attention to what's in your employment agreement, like around that. Ooh, and I would like to get you a mic for the question. And yes, by the way, Nate is happy to bring a mic over to you if you have questions. Everybody should ask lots of questions.
I remember a number of years ago, there was a very small little feature I was trying to contribute to Emacs, and Richard Stallman absolutely would not receive it without full legal sign-off, and the paperwork and everything absolutely would not Well, a couple revs later, it was in there. Anyway, but so it's also from the project owner's side. They're really concerned that they don't compromise their ownership.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Could people hear that in the back? Okay, good. I'm like, we can never tell up here if the mics are exactly acting the way they should or not, since we're not in the back. I think it's really important when you're trying to either contribute to a project. Maybe they'll have a bot on GitHub that'll answer you, or they'll have RMS will be typing to you in, I don't know, parchment and quills or whatever. But there'll often be something that tells you, like, what are the, contingencies of you even submitting to this project. What have you folks seen?
Well, I just wanted to point out that you do not have to contribute code to contribute to open source. And it's really important to me as a non-code contributor that documentation counts and marketing collateral counts, and it all counts as open source contribution, and it all needs to happen. Like, if we don't have somebody writing the manuals on how to install it, you're not going to get it installed because it came out of somebody's brain and nobody has paid them to write manuals about it.
Wait, you're saying that you can't just use the source, Luke?
It turns out that not everybody thinks the same way
What?
the original author does.
I feel like we have to have that meme with, like, yeah. I know that the Microsoft Docs people have really impressed me so far with, it was actually surprising to me coming into a dev advocacy role that the first person I sat down and interviewed with was the head of a Docs team. And I was like, wow, they're prioritizing this. Like, what have you seen in terms of those outward-facing either contributions from the community or putting information out to the community?
It's greatly improved. If anybody's familiar with Microsoft Docs, even 2 years ago, well, I feel sorry for it. I apologize now. So they realize they have to really put a focus on that. So it's easy to use. It's easy for people to contribute back to those documents. And it's just kind of great to see that because the whole process, especially from the community, has really improved our documentation. So I'd agree that's a really important thing, that contributing back to documentation is also contributing back to open source.
And if that sounds really intimidating, just think about the time that you were going through some sort of quick start on GitHub in a project that you were installing, and you found the one thing that totally didn't work, but you were able to get it working. You don't have to write a giant document. You could literally just submit a pull request with a small clarification for that one thing that tripped you up and cost you 20 minutes. And imagine all of the people's 20 minutes that won't get wasted then. And Dave brought up community again, and I put it in the title of this meetup because I think it's important. And it's also kind of a fuzzy word. And I'm going to put Heather on the spot because she's done a lot of community building inside organizations and in the wider community. Can you talk a little bit about what you think it means to start building a technical community in your organization to start with? How do you do that?
It's very important to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'll start by saying that while I collect my thoughts here.
Oh yeah, by the way, I did not prepare the contestants with any questions.
That's right.
This is all ad hoc.
Building a community is essential, and again, so like I've worked in large enterprise IT organizations for most of my career, and so that's the perspective I come from. And building that community amongst across the organization is one of the most powerful ways, in my opinion, to break down silos in terms of who's doing what kind of work, how can we, and getting to a point where we all are kind of working together to create something that's very cool and good, which sounds really kind of cheesy as I say it out loud. But
that all sounds great though, but how?
How to do it? So a couple of different ways. I guess I would recommend doing it. I think having internal forums, something similar to this, where it could just be hour-long, like brown bag lunch and learn types of things, where you're bringing people together to talk about, hey, who's working on? So I work a lot in the building APIs, building data streams, like bringing those kinds of folks together that are working on similar types of problems and just having conversations. Interestingly, I shouldn't say interestingly, I also find persistent chat tools to be incredibly powerful to build communities. Like I'll say I was, if you'd asked me that maybe 3-4 years ago, I would have been a skeptic and been like, oh, come on, like, what are we really going to get out of this? Like, why are you making me switch tools? But I'm relatively new in my current position, maybe 6 months in, and working to get a broad team into a tool that we can use to, persistent chat, start doing chat ops and doing that. And it's an incredibly powerful way to build community and kind of just grassroots connections for people that are working on similar things, on similar topics. What else would I say about it?
And cat gifts. I mean,
And cat gifts.
well,
Super important.
I mean, implied.
essential. And I think that's interesting that you bring that up. That idea of the tooling that we use is going to influence how the community grows. And I know that Heidi has all the feels about this. So
I do.
I see you getting keyed up to tell us. So tell us about the way tools influence culture.
I think that, first of all, the thing I want to say about communities is you need to start out with an idea of what kind of community you want to build, because if you let it happen, you might grow something you don't want. So you need to say up front, this is a place where we're cooperative, this is a place where it is not okay to be Linus Torvald. Like, you need to say, these are the expected standards of behavior, because it's not okay to swear at your coworkers. Like, we shouldn't have to say that, and it should be in the employee handbook, but if we don't say it up front, then nobody has the backing to stand up and say, hey, I don't want to be treated like that. So I think that's like the first important thing for building any community for me, is to have a code of conduct and say, look, this is how we behave in this space. The other thing about tools affecting how we think and how, I have this blog post that I've been like stewing on for a month, which is really a long time for my blog post, but it's basically Confluence is a really difficult tool to use because it thinks in silos. And as soon as we follow the way Confluence thinks about things, we've siloed ourselves off from other parts of the organization. And it's very difficult to create cross connections. And so it's possible to use Confluence to build a tool that is flatter and less silo-y, but you have to set out to deliberately break the tool to do it. So all tools think in a certain way. Slack thinks in a certain way. Like, it really promotes the use of cat gifts. Like literally, it makes it super easy to do React Gs and like these visual emotives that make a conversation with remote workers so much more connected. Like, I'm a remote worker, and Slack has decreased my loneliness like 400%, because emails are almost always brusque and businesslike. But if somebody says something and someone else posts the GIF of Homer sinking slowly into the bushes, that's an emotion, as opposed to like assuming from email that they're like slightly abashed.
And that's actually a really good point. What you bring up about Confluence is making me think that, all right, I've been at Microsoft for 8 days now. So far, I find SharePoint baffling. And I never tried to use it before this because reasons. So Dave, can you talk at all about tool choice and SharePoint and reasons, and like what you think about improving the outward-facing and inward, tools, documentation, and community-facing stuff?
So I'll say we use like 50 tools to communicate. Every single person has a tool they use, whether it's Microsoft Teams, or they use Slack, or email. There's groups, there's
All of the above.
email. Everybody loves email there. I advocate to use one tool to communicate, or try to, being whether that tool for us is really Teams, which is kind of like Slack. Same idea around it, because it fosters definitely a different type of communication with people. And when you have to go to like 8 places to communicate, it's a struggle. I usually just slam my laptop and don't respond. So that's a very big work in progress for someone like Microsoft, who was, kind of the inventor of Exchange. And People love their email, but it's starting to change where teams are coming together to really be able to communicate, because I think the point you made about it kind of changes culture, and it really does.
And when you're in, Heather, you suggested, and I'm not going to ask you to name a specific tool, but you suggested that you're working on kind of changing the way chat tools work at Optum. And I'm curious, when you're going through in a large enterprise, whether it's Optum or past employers, when you're going through that process of trying to either peel people away from the, I don't know, jabber or yammer or whatever that they're really attached to, or like trying to get people to use the kind of tool they maybe haven't used before, how do you approach that?
Well, so the space that I work in is like the middleware space, right? So like we integrate all of everybody to everyone. So we sit right in the middle. And so my theory is, if I say we will all move to this tool, I'm not going to mention the tool. It's a Slack-like tool, not Slack. But if we all get momentum where we're using this tool, if we have the team that is the data that connects everyone together across the ecosystem, like slowly but surely, if we say, well, if you want to ask us a question about is API XYZ down, please ask us on the Slack chat, this, whatever the channel is. That's how I'm approaching. I mean, I don't have a better answer or more ask me again in a few months and see how my experiment works.
It sounds like what you're saying is if you make it appealing and there's information people want there, they will feel like they have incentives.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. There has to be, people hate change. Like,
Yes.
we really hate it. People are moving our cheese all the time, and we're very resentful about it. So there has to be something to motivate us, some kind of reward to get us to change our behavior. And I think it's really interesting to sort of watch a team work through that. I actually had a really interesting interaction with Lever today, which is a recommendation tool. And somebody asked me a question about a candidate that I recommended. And instead of having to go back into Lever and log in and again and everything, they sent me a customized email. And it said, just reply to the email and we'll feed it back into the tool. And I'm like, oh, that's so much easier than having to like switch context to this different tool. So I think if I were trying to get a team to adopt a more chat-based thing, I would start feeding the status reports into that additionally. Like, they could still live there, but like create yourself a Hubot that inputs the stuff that they want to know about automatically. Yeah. So it's sort of pre-populated.
Well, and a lot of your chat tools will, for example, I can mention PagerDuty. Sponsor here tonight, but they did not product place this particular mention. If you use the PagerDuty integrations with your chat tool, then you can have your alerts going into a channel that people are hopefully already looking at and paying attention to, since we all possibly have enough email that we might not see important yet, and we have a question in the back. We have important but not necessarily page somebody levels, but something you want people to see. It's nice to use those integrations with tools to bring that into where people already are.
Agree.
And we have a question.
I just wanted to say I also work at Optum with Heather. I don't met, but I've been here 11 years, and we've been an instant messenger community for so long. And
yes.
And I won't name tools, but one of our biggest challenges is when we start dealing with tools like Slack. Our information risk management people have very strong controls about external access into that world.
Yeah. Yeah, so we do have, as part of the suite of agile tooling, we do have a persistent chat tool in place that's approved, IRM approved. I think it's a matter of getting kind of the mass of people into that tool. The provisioning process is difficult right now at best. I know the team is working on improving that. But to the point of like making it easier and like help me understand why I should use that instead of whatever the instant messenger, Jabber, whatever it is that you're using within the organization, is to start pulling in like event notifications and like help everybody like see the like, wow, it's helping me understand the context of what's happening today within my team and across my partner teams. Like it is just an incredibly powerful way to build a community and to raise awareness about what's going on.
And I think that that's one of the things, and I think Dave can address this in more depth than I can, but one of the things that I've noticed at Microsoft is I wasn't expecting to get as much information necessarily as I was, just because in the organizations I've worked in before, the teams that I was working with, it was pretty clear which teams' chat channels I should be in and what I should be reading. And Microsoft is obviously bigger, much bigger. And there's a constant flood of information, but there's also, I don't know how to put it, maybe just kind of a surface level glimpse into what is happening in other teams that you can see in, Teams, in the tool. I'm curious, because you've worked at Microsoft as that has started to kind of become more popular, how have you seen that trend going of getting people in different parts of the org to have a better view of what other groups are doing?
So through like Microsoft Teams, it hasn't been as successful, but pretty much we utilize distribution list, unfortunately.
Oh,
but
I've been getting a bunch of email. I can't promise that I've read it all thoroughly.
yeah,
but
you have to use a lot of rules.
that's what I
But
haven't figured out how to do yet.
It's a very open. You can go into and sign in, pretty much request access to any distribution list. That's one of the things I found at Microsoft, that within the engineering teams and even the field teams, there's a lot of sharing of knowledge between those. A lot of times you have to be able to figure out how to find it. And that's kind of what we're trying to improve on, is our own kind of internal community sharing too. But yeah, that's kind of all over the place right now, but improving over time.
Well, I was on site in Seattle last week, and a coworker who was also onboarding and I went over to a lunch and learn that was kind of like a little internal meetup that had people. One fellow was giving a short version of a presentation he had given at the Mesosphere event, and then there were a couple of other presentations about some of the stuff around the licensing of open source projects, and then a few other ones. And I thought it was interesting that it was very meetup-like, but it was at lunchtime. I'm kind of curious if any of you can talk about what you've seen inside organizations that try to bring that sort of sharing into the context of people's regular workday. Go ahead.
It's super old school, but I love a newsletter.
Really?
Yeah, I really want to have somebody curate that for me and say, here's the interesting thing coming out of this team. And that human curation lets me know that this is actually what that team wants promoted. I may not read it except for the headline, but I'm like, oh, okay, what that team cares about right now is this. This is the thing that they're thinking about. And so a weekly newsletter, it requires human power. It's not a trivial thing to assemble, but it's really powerful for communicating across silos and corporate junction places.
Oh, nice.
So that's funny that you say that, because at Microsoft, when I first started, I started a newsletter there. I thought it was a little old school, but I called it the Thirsty Thursday, and it became wildly popular. And I mean, even my upper management called me Thirsty Thursday. None of them knew my name, but they called me Thirsty Thursday. But it was an easy way to disseminate information that was important, easy to read, because as you can imagine at Microsoft, all the different product sets, just, Azure in general, there's so much change in there. But if you can make that a smaller thing, make some fun of it, people enjoy it. So it was interesting that you said that.
But DevOps-ish, I read that, and
yeah.
I read a bunch of industry newsletters that are curated by one really dedicated, on-task person.
Gareth Rushgrove's DevOps Weekly.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, he said some years ago, pro tip, never put the word weekly in the title of anything you're going to do. That, as it turns out, is a large commitment.
Something that I haven't seen it play out yet. I've only been in the planning stages of it at Optum. We have something that's called Dev Days. And so the idea of brown bags, and it's over the course of 6 or 8 weeks, something like that. Weekly lunch topics, some from 12 to 1, and then it's a session of, different topics in each of those weeks. for things that are kind of hot within the organization. And so it might be like, hey, let's talk about cloud computing and like, is Azure on the horizon? You know, so like the person leading that agenda within the organization will talk about that for an hour. And so I think, again, just like an interesting way to like get out to a broad community, like here's some ideas. Maybe you're not interested in them, but then you at least see them and be like, wow, here's like 6 to 8 different topics that are really important broadly across the technology organization at this point in time.
And that's sharing inside your organization. There's also, in the broader community, sharing outside your organization. And I happen to know that all 3 of you have done some amount of speaking at conferences and events, some more than others. But I'm curious if, I would love to have all of you just starting with my fellow purple pink hair, give us a sense of how and why you start with that community-bound sharing. If someone wanted to do that, what kind of advice do you have for them?
Start speaking here, because this is a very unintimidating level of people. This is not so bad. Like your local meetups, your local small groups, get your message perfected. All of my talks are things that I've been angry about. All of them. Usually by the time I get up on stage, I've gotten to the point where I no longer want to throw water bottles at people. But this is my way to channel rage at like what I perceive as inefficiency.
I'm often live tweeting your talks from the front row, so I would appreciate not being lambasted with water bottles.
I'll keep that in mind. Don't kill the live tweeter. So what I did was I had this talk about how to, my first talk was a documentation talk because I was a technical writer, and I went to a documentation conference, and I was like, okay, I really have strong opinions about these things. And I gave the talk, and it turns out that it's really useful because people will come up and tell you all the ways that you are slightly wrong. Usually they won't tell you when you're very wrong. They'll just go off and like blog about it, and you'll find out about it later when somebody subtweets it, and you're like, can't talk to me, whatever. But they'll come up and say, oh, that's really interesting, but actually it works this way at my company. And as I iterate the talk, because this is a thing that nobody told me early on, you can give your talks more than once. You can give your talks more than 5 times. I gave one talk 17 times. And I stopped because I just could not face giving that talk again. It wasn't that people didn't want it. I was just like, no, I'm done. It's been recorded. You're on your own, people.
And people are live tweeting number 17, and the fun part is when you can kind of guess ahead of time what the tweets are going to be, and later you're like, yep. All right, I'm done giving this talk because I can predict the tweets ahead of time.
Yeah, exactly. I'm done now. But it's really interesting to me. Every time I give a talk, it's different. Every time I have some different examples. Every time the audience reaction feeds into what I emphasize or what I clip out, because I find it so fascinating to speak dynamically. I have this huge problem timing my talks because I have to time them for 5 to 10 minutes under the talk time. As soon as I get an audience, I expand like one of those little pills that you put in water and you get a sponge thing. So I'll just expand to fill the available time. So I have to make sure I write my talks to be a little shorter than you would think. But there's this amazing community of people who go to conferences and speak, and and it's pretty exciting because you'll run into them over and over again at conferences. Here's the other thing I wish people had told me. Apply for a talk, and then if they accept you, you say, either you get your employer to pay, or if you've run out of the money to do that, you say, I'm self-funding, what can you do to help me?
Conferences
Never.
usually have a budget.
Yeah, never, if you are self-funding, you better get a free ticket. You should probably get your travel and hotel covered. Probably won't get paid, but you should never, ever, ever, ever pay to attend a conference that you are contributing content to.
Yep.
I'm looking at you, people who know I'm looking at them.
That their conference is happening very soon here?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure my current employer is a big sponsor of that conference, so I'm not going to name them.
See
but
how I
conferences that do that, no. All right, so if your job is not dev advocacy, dev rel, community relations stuff, but you still find yourself out there talking to people, how and why, Heather?
I do it for 2 reasons. And they're all, maybe I should say 3 reasons. And they're all like relatively selfish in different ways. One is to build my own network within the community and like where I spend my time professionally and a lot of my life. I like to know people outside of, the 4 walls of the organization that I work in. Secondly, and again, selfish reason, it makes my job a lot easier if the place where I am working is viewed as an interesting place to work, that's doing good things and has hard problems to solve. So I really like telling those stories.
You're saying that makes it easier to hire?
Because it makes it easier to hire. And then the third selfish reason would be, I forgot what my third idea was going to be. Like for me personally, for building teams, and I think, well, maybe then I'll just say like maybe that's not the selfish reason, but again, just giving back to a broader community. Like I really appreciate listening to other people at conferences, whether I'm there live, watching it on YouTube, replaying it, whatever. Like we all have stories to tell and share, and I like the idea of other people learning from the mistakes that I've made or from like the good decisions I've made or like the good things that I've done. So just like giving back to the broader community. So 2 selfish, 1 not. How about that?
I would actually say you shouldn't sound so bashful when you say, well, these are selfish reasons. Because honestly, and this doesn't just go for you, but like for everyone in this room and everyone who watches a video later, guess what? There is one person on the planet who's going to watch out for your career and take care of your career and grow your career. And it's not your boss. And that's not even the job of your spouse. They're going to be very supportive of you, but your job as part of being a professional in the industry is to watch out for your career and make the connections you need to make and make sure you're learning and growing. Like if you are ready to go to work and you know everything you're going to do that day and until the heat death of the universe, you're probably in the wrong job because you're not learning anything anymore. So that's my public service announcement. Do everything for selfish reasons in your career because that be a relentless mercenary when it comes to taking care of your career because it's just kind of like in relationships with other human beings. You want to be the person who has your shit together so that you can support other people. So, all right. So, in your estimation, what would you say is important here?
So really what's important, I'll say, let me first start, I started in, user groups in, 2000 when it was, the free BSD user group, and you brought in, your, your big iron, and you went in there, and you was, figure out how to install it. So that's, I thought that was, so cool. All these people want to help me do this, and, all I had knowledge of was, Windows ME. And it was really cool. So that's kind of how, and I continued being involved in different user groups over the year. But like myself, I organize the Docker meetup in the city here. And, I just love seeing people share their experiences. I wish more people would do it, though.
Ooh, are you saying that you want people who want to speak about their container experience to speak at your meetup?
Yes, absolutely. Everyone. So it's a lot of times we have a lot of vendors come in. Their talks, some of them are interesting, some are just a product pitch, which I would like to avoid because, I think we all have something interesting to share. Sometimes as humans we underestimate ourselves and think, oh, that's not, very cool. I mean, we all can't be Kelsey Hightower and deploy quantum computing from our phones, but you don't have to be.
Live Tetris while speaking. That was the really good.
Didn't somebody do a conference talk saying we can't all be Kelsey Hightower?
So you don't have to be that. There's so many things. If you come in and just talk about your experience with Docker or containers or this kernel feature you found, people will find that interesting. I guarantee it. At least I'll find it interesting. So you got one supporter. So I have a question for the crowd actually. What would make you more comfortable, speaking at these events? Because I've even offered out to our Docker meetup and even wrote a blog post on this about helping others, put together content or co-speaking with them if it makes them feel more comfortable. So I would like to understand more people where, it could get them more comfortable speaking. So I think there's a lot of value in it for us all to share.
None of us win if we keep listening to the same speakers over and over again. Like, I'm not going to lose my job if I don't get every conference thing.
I got a quick question. How do you guys dictate, like, how do you move forward on something when you're like, oh, that's a good idea, maybe other people will be interested about it? Where's that dog fooding come into play? Do you throw it around teams first, or like where does that cycle start? And where do you guys understand, like, oh, this might be a bigger issue, I might want to share this down the road, I may want to go to a panel, so on and so forth?
Twitter.
Yeah.
Because I work alone. Twitter is really like my giant company of coworkers, and I have curated lists. So if I think something is specific, I'll throw it out there, and then like hashtag it to the list and see what comes back to me. Sometimes it's a big nothing burger.
I think that that's actually a really good point, and there's a reason that I put all of our esteemed panelists' Twitter handles up here, because I realize that it seems to be trendy on the nightly news right now to put a whole bunch of distressing Twitter things that we think are going to lead to nuclear war. But there are other uses of Twitter other than instigating nuclear war. And a good one is keeping up with tech trends and paying attention to your broader tech community. Especially, I would say, for people who might be like kind of just thinking about switching jobs, or they aren't really to the point of, filling out applications somewhere. Spoiler alert, don't do that. Talk to people. The applications are not as fast of a route as interacting with people. But if you're thinking about switching, just starting to open that fire hose of following a hashtag or picking a couple of people who do a lot of retweeting, or say a lot of live conference tweeting. Tell us about live tweeting of conferences.
Wait, we didn't get anybody to answer here.
All right, he has a mic.
He has a mic.
Let's get some hands about what's keeping you from being up here. And go. Ooh, we have one. Yes. Nice. I feel like there's a bit of a problem in this question, because if they don't, we're asking them to talk and they maybe don't want to.
Yeah.
I think from a couple different meetups, in that self-doubt probably prevents people from thinking that this is a problem worth addressing. And maybe if organizers, we could get like a list of a whole bunch of different problems that are valuable to talk about, and one person can think, oh, I know how to do that. And then now we have a talk.
That's one thing that AlterConf does that I really like, is they give you a list of possible topics that they're interested in. And I would say don't self-reject. Like, it's super easy to say, oh, I don't think anybody wants to hear about that. Not your job. Bridget's job.
Oh, thanks. Yes, I definitely need more to do.
I have
How many conferences do you curate or sit on the board, the selection board for?
I don't know, maybe 5 or 6.
Right.
I was at DevOps Days the last few years, and I get intimidated when there's a really smart 8-year-old giving the most amazing speech of his entire life. No, but just kidding. I think, confidence and just maybe not being completely familiar, but that's okay. I mean, you got to explore it, and we're in a safe place that no one's going to go and say, "Oh, you idiot!" That we're all just we want to learn from each other.
I think maybe one of the good things that we did last meetup that I thought was great, and maybe we'll do again next time, is have a bunch of shorter talks too, because that way it's a smaller commitment for you. And then you can think to yourself, if everyone hates my talk, it'll be over in 8 minutes and they can enjoy the next one.
So we have a knowledge explosion going on in the world, knowledge inflation, and we're trying to learn more and more and more and more, and we can't. So we have this huge breadth and growth of this breadth, and none of us really can even see the horizon. It's 13 miles away, and it's curving over there. We have no idea, so we don't see the full plan. But we also do have to have a need to do our daily jobs and drill down. So we have this breadth thing, and we've got the need for some depth somewhere. How do you balance that? So that's one of the things that gets in the way of all of us talking, because we don't know the landscape that each person needs, and each person needs depth in different areas, but we have this breadth that's out of our reach. How do you choose between the breadth and the depth in different areas in this crazy exploding knowledge world?
I think Heather has a good perspective.
Well,
Talk about the kind of talks you've been giving, say, the last couple of years at DevOps Enterprise Summit.
Yeah, and I reacted, like, I think I had, like, an emotional reaction as you were like, how do you get out of your, like, daily grind to even just think about what that talk's going to be? And I'll say just, like, it is incredibly stressful for me. That's, like, not, like, I am not on the conference circuit, so I, you know, talk at 2, maybe 3 conferences a year, and I pick a topic that's, like, easy for me to talk about, and it's, what is it that what is it that we have done for the year? Like, what's next? What's, you know, so it's taking my, like, what is my day-to-day job that's causing me all sorts of stress and, like, God, my heart, even just, like, I'm doing a talk in a couple weeks and I haven't really prepped for it, and now I'm getting really nervous thinking about it. But, like, we know about the work that we're doing, like, even if it's broad, like, even if you feel like it's broad, like, you're still deep in the area that you work, and just talking about that and, like, taking a step back, and I have always found it to be incredibly insightful in a good way for me to, like, look back, okay, over the course of the last 6 months or 12 months, whatever it is that I'm talking about, like, what have we done, what have we accomplished, what did we learn, where did we fail, where did we succeed, and, like, what's next for us? And all of a sudden you're like, wow, holy smokes, like, that's pretty cool to talk about and share that. So I don't know, but like the anxiety, that was my reaction that Bridget saw me of, like, oh God, I totally know that, like, stress leading up to it, because it's not really part of my job that I do. I just do it because, you know, for the reasons that I shared earlier. That's why I make it a priority and, like, add that stress to myself.
Almost every postmortem talk is interesting. We really care why it failed and how to keep it from happening to us.
Yeah, I think that's probably a thing that has helped me try to figure out what to put in the talk, because sometimes you're like, I could talk about all the things, blah. And when you're trying to figure out how to scope what you're going to talk about, the story you're going to tell, I like to think of what are the actionable takeaways for the people in the room. Yeah. They want to be entertained. They want to see pictures of my cat. I mean, obviously, I'm pretty sure a cat kitten is what most of those people are following me on Twitter for. But they want to be entertained, but they want infotainment, and they also want things that are applicable to their use case. I've actually had people write in the comments, they went to the effort of logging in to say, like, 1 star was not applicable to my use case. And I'm like, who are you? What is your use case?
Yeah, right, tell me your use case so I can do better.
So never read the comments. I've gotten some great reviews. I also got, room was too cold. I'm like, you're right, my talk cost that. I co-presented with my former manager and good friend Andrew Clay Schaefer at Agile last year. And we got one review that said, 1 star, too funny, like a stand-up routine. I was like, oh my God.
Oh no, the terror.
That's so terrible. But I think some of the fear of presenting can be, what are people going to think? And the answer is, they aren't going to think about you at all. They're going to think about their own use case. They're going to think about the book report someone wants them to write when they come back from this conference that the company paid for. They're going to want to know how they will solve their myriad terrible problems that are keeping them up at night. And they're hoping your talk has something in it for them. And so if you're thinking about it from the point of view of, why do people come to this talk, and what am I hoping that they'll take away from it, at that point you'll be way less afraid to put up the screenshot with your terrible outage and your terrible errors and all of the rabbit holes you went down that were wrong. Because if you present the final finished product is perfect, people can't learn from all the places that you screwed up. And they want to learn from those things.
And I find it's just speaking on anything you're passionate about, if you're passionate about a topic, you can talk about pretty much anything and people will find it interesting. And it makes putting that talk together, just having that talk, so much easier. That, and I mean, I got started speaking internally, you know, at work events, things like that. So I think that's the hardest place to present, is in front of, I had to go in front of 300 coworkers. I puked like 3 times before it. I only puked once tonight, so I'm doing better. But I mean, everybody is going to be uncomfortable, and you know, I still always have that feeling. So sometimes you gotta get over it, but again, there's a lot of ways to share in the community. So it's not forcing you to, you know, go up there and speak, but I just kind of selfishly wanted to get more speakers at the Docker meetup. So if you want to speak at the Docker meetup,
Hey.
or Azure user group, either one.
Apparently, I'm going to be speaking at the Azure user group.
Yes.
Didn't get fast enough.
November 2nd, I think. So I should probably learn something about Azure. 8 days in. I don't have my health insurance all set up yet.
This is the other exciting thing is you can submit a CFP, and I really love it when we have like CFP writing groups where everybody.
Do you want to define that for people who are like, what?
Sorry, call for proposal. So a conference will say, hey, we're accepting proposals. Here's papercrawl.io or whatever they're using, and they'll tell you what they want, and then you write a proposal. You're like, I want to give this talk, more than one. Submit 5 talks. They'll only pick one. Very rarely do they pick all 5.
And you can say no if
And
they
you can
want
say
you
no.
to give too many.
Yeah, but and then you're sort of forced to write it. There's this forcing point. You're like, oh, well, I guess I need to get that done in the next couple months. And
They accepted that talk. I guess that talk should exist.
yeah, I do not write talks on spec. It's not worth my time. So until it's accepted, it's not written, and it works out fine because I'm a really deadline motivated person.
And I think that's another thing to consider too, probably because the term CFP is kind of overloaded, and some people might think it means call for papers, and they're a little concerned they might have to write a paper, and they remember school and they didn't like that. And unless you're at an academic conference and a couple of conferences that have relationships to academia, there will be no paper writing. They may want you to turn slides into them. I suggest ignoring that because for the most part, you're going to be tweaking and making changes as you learn new things, as you get new exciting error messages, etc. So like freezing your talk in amber 2 weeks before you give the talk is not on. Like that's not likely to be super useful or productive.
The thing that kills me is the minute by minute outline. I'm like, it's not happening. Not happening.
I saw it, and I was just like sitting here trying to remember who it was that I saw that tweeted it in the last week or so. The like phases that you go through when you do a CFP, and it's like, certainly yes, I can talk about that for 45 minutes, and then the like phase 2 is like, how in the world am I going to talk about that for 45 minutes? And then like last is
How do I cut this down to 45 minutes?
Exactly. And like that, I think that's exactly the process that you go through. Yeah.
I get excited when I get rejections. Then I'm like, yes. Whew, thank God I don't have to do that.
Well, and I love, like, if I can't go to a conference, like, I have to go decline a conference this evening because I just physically, that's the wrong continent. I like.
Did you know it was on that continent when you applied?
What were the odds they would both accept me? I did, but choices were made. Poor choices. So I have to go decline a conference. They accepted my talk, and it's really hard to say, oh, wow, you picked me out of all these other people, but no. But I have to do it, and one of the things I like to do is say, hey, would you like this other speaker? They're great. They're super. It's a great way you can pull along somebody and say, look, you may not have thought of this person, they may not have submitted in time, but look at this speaker, look at this person, I think they have great potential.
Ooh, and you could say, for example, say they spoke at the Minneapolis DevOps meetup, and we have Tad in the back room doing wonderful video here. You would have a video to show. So-and-so spoke at the Minneapolis DevOps meetup. Look at this lightning talk they gave. Wow, that looks really cool. I want to see a longer version of that.
Video is super helpful. Like, if you have some, make sure you put it someplace people can find it.
I suggest the internet.
Yeah. Well, the internet is a big neighborhood, so sometimes you might want to like tag it with your name or something. We're not all Bridget.
I do have a Google unique name. I have my parents are very wise to have in the 70s chosen a Google unique name for me. So we're just about out of time. And I hope that this has given you at least one or two things to think about in terms of building more community inside your organizations or figuring out how you can plug in more to the wider tech community. Because that's basically my rallying call to everyone is you're here on your own time in the evening, unless you're some sort of shift worker and for some reason they send you to meetups during your job. You're probably here on your own time. and you're hoping to get something out of it. And I hope what you're hoping to get out of it is connections inside your community. So I'm going to just ask for a quick closing thought from each of our panelists, and then I'm going to challenge you. Whatever it is that they tell us as a closing thought to think about, pick at least one person near you and ask them what they think about it before you quickly walk out. Because there is food, there is drink left, but there's also the opportunity to let them spark some conversations for you. So I'm going to start with Heidi and then move on and say, what would you like people to think about?
I would like people to think about intentionality in the communities that they create and support. I want you to think about who it is you want to hang out with. I want you to kick bad actors out. And if you do that, you will find an amazing, gregarious, diverse, sparkly community of awesome people to hang out with.
Who treat each other well.
I know,
What? Nice.
I'm just going to build on what we were kind of just talking about, and that is encourage everybody to speak either at an event like this or within your own company. I personally probably started doing it 3 or 4 years ago, thanks to Bridget, and it's had an immense impact on just like my career, my happiness in my career, like how I've been able to like take broader just like opinions and what's going on in the industry and apply that to the work that I do. So I'd highly, highly encourage everybody to do that, and whatever is comfortable for you.
Nice.
So one of the things for me is, you know, when you go to a meetup and you see that person, they've probably never been to the meetup. They're probably acting like they're on the phone, but they're really not. They're scared. That was me at one time. Still do every once in a while. But, you know, introduce yourself. Say hi. Introduce them to somebody else. Because a lot of times I see we kind of have these groups of people that we're really familiar with, and we kind of close off into those groups. But look at those people around you you've never met. You know, introduce yourself. Say hi. People are interesting. I think we're all kind of awkward in our own way, which is awesome. Because I'd hate talking to normal people all day. Like, we could talk about, like, the weather, football game.
Ask about my laptop stickers.
I don't think we can talk about the weather or football games anymore without it being political.
Oh, that's true. That's true. So, but yeah, just, you know, be awesome. Don't go to a meetup, and I always have an unofficial code of conduct, which is don't be an asshole, because I figure that's an easy one for everyone to understand. I don't put that up because that's not very welcoming. But yeah, just be awesome. I mean, there's so much that we can share in the community and learn, and there's so much stuff out there we can learn. So just kind of think about that when you're at meetups, how you can include more people and conversations and that.
Bring a buddy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll just close off with saying, if you're looking at me up here and you're thinking, oh, well, I mean, that's Bridget. She's a sparkly DevOps princess. I did have business cards that said that at Drama Fever, to be funny. But the first time I spoke at any kind of event was at Mini Demo in 2013, because my boss at the time, some of you may know, Jamie Thingelstead, now the CTO of SPS Commerce, was my boss at a cute, quirky little startup and encouraged me to go speak. And I dragged a coworker along as a security blanket. And we spoke together about all of the disastrous things that happened when we tried to run MongoDB in production. Spoiler alert, not great. So, and I've heard, though, MongoDB is theoretically much better now because they apparently bought a database and glued it to Mongo. And so it's no longer a session store that's just going to lose data. No, I'm serious. Like, I've actually heard it's very good now. But in 2013, it was terrifying. But it was a great story. So I told that story and with my coworker. And fast forward to 2017. Is it 2017?
It is.
None of these dates sound real.
No.
But it supposedly is 2017. And I've spent a lot of time in front of people telling these stories, mostly about terrible choices I've made. Talk to me about HBase too. But telling these stories and sharing my mistakes, and so that other people can hopefully not make them. And also just helping build those communities that we all rely on, hopefully getting past that bluff that everybody is totally cool and has everything together except us, everything for us is a disaster, but we're just going to act like it's okay. It's like, no.
Everybody else is paddling under the water too.
Yeah, I had a 4-hour really significant production issue that I worked on this morning, so maybe anybody at Optum might have noticed that our API gateway was down for 4 hours. But
Right? And this is,
Yeah, I
this
mean,
is
like-
the realities that we all live in. So, like, if we talk to each other about it, it's way better. So that's my pitch, is like, talk to each other, the end. So thank you all so much for coming, and please give it up for our great panelists.